Here's another goofy attempt to prove that Jesus rose from the dead.
Today I'm going to give you 5 undeniable reasons why you must believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's coming up next on The Beat. Hey everyone, my name is Alan Parr. Thank you all so much for tuning into The Beat. Today we want to ask the question, how can we know for sure that Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead? I mean, is this just some myth or some clever fable that a group of people made up that has trickled down throughout history that we have just been told to believe? Or is there some evidence or some proof that this is really indeed the truth? And so today I want to give you 5 undeniable reasons why you must believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Reason number 1 is because of the precautions of the Romans. Now you must understand that the Romans started hearing rumors that the disciples were going to come and steal the body of Jesus Christ away and say that he rose from the dead. And so in order to prevent this from happening, they did 3 things. First of all, they put what's called a guard around the tomb. And a guard was nothing more than a group of 10 to 30 soldiers who were highly trained to protect this tomb and guard it with their lives. The second thing they did was they put a stone around the opening of the tomb, and this stone weighed somewhere close to 3,000 or 4,000 pounds. And so this hindered anybody who wanted to come in or get out. And then the third thing they did is actually put a Roman seal around this stone such that if anyone tampered with or broke this seal, they were punished by death.
None of this is credible or makes any sense in light of the fact that the whole point of crucifixion was to humiliate and desecrate the body of the person being crucified. Why the fuck would the Romans crucify Jesus, then allow Jesus to be given a dignified burial? I don't believe that such a burial ever happened, because allowing such a thing defeats the primary purpose of a crucifixion.
So to suggest, as some would, that the disciples broke in and stole the body of Jesus Christ and claimed that he rose from the dead would be highly unlikely, because here is a group of fishermen and tax collectors, and the Bible says shortly before Jesus was crucified that all of them were terrified and afraid and forsook Jesus and ran for their lives. And to think that this fearful group somehow got enough courage to break through a group of highly trained soldiers and steal the body of Jesus Christ is highly unlikely.
And the idea that Jesus was buried in the first place is highly unlikely. But do you know what is even less likely than the body being stolen? A guy coming back from the dead.
The second reason is because of the faith of the disciples. We have to consider once again that right before Jesus was crucified, this group of disciples were cowards. But as soon as he rose from the dead, they all of a sudden turned into fearless preachers who were ready and willing to be beaten, burned, beheaded, sawed into 2, stoned, crucified, and even being willing to risk their very lives.
Where the fuck do you get this information? How do you know they were willing to die for their faith? If they simply said so, that doesn't mean much. I'd only be convinced of this if there were evidence that they did, in fact, die for their beliefs. Where's the evidence for that? If it were in the Bible, I think Bart Ehrman, a New Testament scholar, would know about it.
The disciples were all willing to die for their faith. I didn't hear one piece of evidence for that. I hear that claim a lot, but having read every Christian source from the first 500 years of Christianity, I'd like him to tell us what the piece of evidence is that the disciples died for their belief in the resurrection.
So the question we have to ask is, why would this group of people be willing to risk their very lives for something they knew deep in their hearts was nothing more than a lie?
The question is not whether it is or is not a lie. The question is whether it is or is not true. Even if the disciples did die for their beliefs, that is not evidence that those beliefs are true.
The third reason is because of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. Perhaps one of the most convincing proofs is the fact that the Bible says that after his suffering, he gave many convincing proof that he was alive, and he appeared to them over a period of 40 days.
You seem to think that a proof of what the Bible says about the resurrection can consist of passages from the Bible describing the resurrection. I want proof that Jesus really appeared as the Bible says he did. The mere fact that the Bible makes this claim is not proof of the claim's merit. It is pointless to cite the claim as proof of itself.
The Apostle Paul goes on to say that at one time, Jesus appeared to over 500 people at one time, so much so that when he was writing this letter, he essentially told his readers, hey, if you don't believe me, you don't have to take my word for it. Go and speak to the people who saw them for themselves because most of them are still alive today.
What good does that do us now? Even if we could still talk to these people, so-and-so will tell you such and such does not constitute proof of a single fucking thing.
So to say that Jesus really didn't rise from the dead would suggest that all of these hundreds of people were either crazy or hallucinating, which is highly unlikely.
You know what's even less likely? A guy coming back from the dead? Also, this is a false dichotomy. They may have simply been mistaken rather than crazy or hallucinating. Also, the person who said that these people witnessed what they did could simply have been mistaken. This passage is treated as though it constitutes the testimony of 500 people, when really it is the testimony of one person making a claim about what 500 people witnessed. That's a little trick that apologists frequently like to pull.
Reason number 4 is that secular history confirms it. Now, it would be one thing if the Bible was the only book that recorded the miracle of the resurrection, but other secular history books record the same thing. First of all, it's recorded by a man named Josephus, who was a Jewish, non-Christian historian. Second of all, it was recorded by a man named Thomas Arnold, who wrote the history of Rome.
To say that Josephus and Thomas Arnold recorded the resurrection makes it sound as though they were both eyewitnesses who were there taking notes. The authenticity of the references to the resurrection in Josephus are disputed among historians because they look like they were added by Christians to later copies of Josephus's books. Thomas Arnold lived 1700 years after the fact, so obviously he was not a witness. And other than his history of Rome, he was most known for his published sermons. He was not an unbiased secular authority.
What makes these testimonies even stronger is that they were written by non-Christians who were simply seeking to be credible and trustworthy historians, which means they had to report the truth whether they liked it or not.
On what fucking planet was Thomas Arnold a non-Christian?
More recently, people like Frank Morrison, Lee Strobel, and Josh McDowell, all professed atheists, sought out to disprove the reality of the resurrection, thus proving that Christianity was nothing more than a false religion based on a myth. But as they dug into it and researched it more and more, they found that it was the undeniable truth, and eventually all of them converted over to Christianity.
Religion is a hell of a drug.
And reason number 5 was that the missing body of Jesus Christ was never found. If Jesus never rose from the dead, then that means that his body would have still been in the grave, which means that all the Romans needed to do was simply reproduce the body of Jesus Christ, and then they would have settled the lie that Jesus rose from the dead, thus destroying Christianity forever.
After Jesus was dead, persecution of Christians was sporadic and disorganized until Nero began to target them decades later. The Bible portrays Pontius Pilate as being sympathetic to Christians. So why are you assuming that they had any reason to want to destroy Christianity right away? Even if they had the body, it would be nothing more than a skeleton by the time the empire began to officially target Christians, which wouldn't have been particularly convincing in a time before forensic reconstruction was invented. I'd like to remind you again that I do have a Patreon.